All right. Welcome, everybody. As you are kind of jumping in to our session on personalization, we are going to launch a poll here. And please feel free to answer it and let us know what is one outcome you'd like to drive personalization to drive. And we will get going here in a minute. Thanks for joining. All right. Since we have a lot to cover, we will go ahead and kick it off. So today's webinar, we are going to focus on really practical steps to accelerate personalization efforts. Almost 50% of the teams that we talk to between Optimizely and Cro Metrics really keep saying that they're stuck. So we want to chat through those common sticking points, walk through scalable framework that we use with our clients and we know really works at orgs of any size, and then wrap up by sharing a customer success story. And by the end, we really want you to feel clear on the next step for you to take at your organization with personalization. So if you are just jumping in, go ahead and pop your answer into the poll, and we are going to use that to inform some of our conversation throughout the presentation today. So I'll start with a quick intro. My name is Samantha McClure, and I am the Senior Director of Marketing and Partnerships at Cro Metrics. And for those who aren't familiar, Cro Metrics is the growth agency partner behind a lot of today's fastest growing brands. And we really specialize in full funnel digital optimization, including experimentation, personalization, and just continuous enhancement of the customer digital experience. And I will pass it over to Martin for his intro.
Thank you very much, Samantha. My name is Morten Bokedal. As you probably can hear, I'm not from the US, but I'm from Sweden. I sit in the solutions strategy team at Optimizely, where in short, I am leading the go-to-market for our experimentation and personalization products. And yes, Optimizely is a digital experience platform. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right. So let's dive in. If we want to get the results of the poll, it looks like more conversions and more revenue is number one, closely followed by a stronger user retention and loyalty. So thanks for participating on that poll. Let's really talk about why consumers kind of reward that relevance with more conversions, with stronger loyalty and retention. Starting with about 3/4 of consumers report to be frustrated when content has nothing to do with them. And I think you'll see that a lot more and more, why younger audiences and audiences in general are beginning to turn to AI and things like ChatGPT for simple questions like, what shoes should I buy? And looking for those like consolidated, really personalized recommendations in the most efficient places. And if your experience on your site with your consumer isn't giving that to them, they are likely to go elsewhere. And that really leaves you with less control over the experience as a whole. But it speaks volumes when we can get it right. We see acquisition costs go down, and we really see across the board from Optimizely to Klaviyo to McKinsey, all user research really comes back to that when your users feel like you have tailored that experience to them, that loyalty and retention goes up. So essentially, that's the reason why we really call it this personalization imperative, because it impacts all of those key metrics. And I know as marketers, we kind of live and breathe all of these KPIs, but I think it's a really great time to spend just a moment locking in how much optimizing the entire customer experience is really a big unlock to driving those conversions, that revenue, that retention and loyalty, and just general efficiency of your customer experience across the board. And of course, on that flip side to all of the benefits, there is kind of this downside, and that's the privacy and trust. We've seen that a lot with our own research, and I'm sure you've experienced this with your consumers themselves, but customers want that relevance. They want the personalization, but they also want the respect of their privacy and their data. We see almost, 3/4 of consumers saying that they are increasingly worried about data privacy, and over half have unsubscribed or stopped engaging with a brand because they had one experience that felt really invasive or off the mark. And so when personalization really misses the mark or starts to feel kind of intrusive, it just is not effective, and it does exactly the opposite of what we are trying to do. So it's really key that when we're talking about scaling personalization, that we lock in exactly what the consumer is looking for and drive that relevancy with the respect for their personal data. And to do that best, we're going to talk about this today, but finding that sweet spot of personalization while kind of de-risking this piece of personalization, the best way to do that is really to leverage in that stepped into experimentation process to personalization that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So one of the things, as I was putting together this kind of front part of the deck and content, our Home Chef case study really came to mind to illustrate how nuanced this personalization can be and why experimenting into it is super crucial. So with Home Chef, the goal was to fully re-engage customers who came back to their funnel to log in, but they never actually reactivated that subscription. And so the first step of kind of personalizing this piece of their journey was to tailor this landing page experience specifically for them with an incentive to reactivate. And the incentive itself wasn't actually new. You can see on that left-hand side, the incentive was already there, but this presentation of it was. So this single change netted out to a 65% increase in reactivations and a 16% drop in exit rates. And so clearly that hit on this kind of like powerful trigger of getting them reactivated. And naturally, once you kind of get that 65% lift, you kind of ask, how can we push this even further? And with the first name personalization working well on their login page, we wanted to try a few more of those personalization variations on this landing page. And what we ultimately found was that by putting their name on the landing page, it actually performed worse than if we just used some of this kind of emotional, we missed you content. So with this right-hand side, with just the we missed you, without the first name and the name, we were able to get an additional 2% lift on top of those initial gains. And this is really what we mean by finding kind of that sweet spot. Naturally, I think a lot of us would think, if you personalize, you put the name, you're talking to the customer, they're going to feel like that's a better, journey and experience, but that's not always true. And so as we start delivering this more personal content, we break down those barriers, you're scaling your personalization, adding in that kind of optimization and that experimentation piece is really crucial to make sure that you're not actually cannibalizing previous gains that you may have already had. All right, so again, we want to put up another poll here and hear from you. What is your biggest barrier on advancing personalization in your organization today? And we're going to talk about a few of those here momentarily and leave the poll up. So as we're kind of talking about it, feel free to continue to participate in the poll. So when we talk about getting unstuck with personalization with clients, or we're talking with Optimizely, we find that the problems boil down into these three main categories. And by classifying them this way, we can start to kind of pinpoint which tactics solve each barrier a little bit more clearly. And so the first one is confusion around definitions. And as I'm seeing people participate in the poll, seeing that is one of the least identified with barriers. And I think this is really interesting because it seems so simple. Like, duh, of course, we all know what personalization is. But if you ask 10 different teams what personalization means to them, you will likely get 10 different answers. And so this often happens when different teams are utilizing personalization just slightly differently. Oh, sorry, my poll kind of popped up in front of my slides. Okay, so When one group is thinking that it might be geo-targeting, another may think it's kind of that AI-driven dynamic content. And when everybody's kind of defining it differently, then the KPIs, while they may seem really streamlined and clear, they are slightly nuanced and slightly different, and it starts to create that friction. And so a great way to unblock this is simply by just sending out a short survey on how you define personalization and giving that option for an other and seeing how teams across your organization define personalization. And then as we're seeing here, it's interesting. So limited resources and budget constraints are the one of the other top ones, and then data silos and lack of confident data. And so that is the one that I think we all hear the most when we're talking to people, is that they don't know if they have the right data, their data isn't, connected, split among 5 different systems. And this is honestly one of the most called out barriers. But as Martin's going to talk about here shortly, you don't really need perfect data to scale, but you do need to figure out where scaling that data makes sense. So again, a good way to kind of unblock this is simply to write down where you think you don't have that confident data, or the data silo feels like it's blocked. And a lot of times you're going to come and find that it's okay, maybe it's simply your personalization platform. And then that's an easier unblock because you can talk to those teams. But a lot of times it's hard to identify what exactly that data blocker is. And so Martin has a really great graphic, and we're going to talk through kind of the tiers of the data silos here in a minute. And then the last one being organizational inertia, no clear ownership. And this one, again, I think is really interesting, like number one, because people get stuck in their own kind of siloed teams. And so a lot of the times there's either no single owner, or there's 10 different teams that are owning a personalization journey within their own teams. And if that's the case, you can see one department start to get traction on their on the website personalization, for example. And then when you try to scale that out and do symmetric messaging with paid, it sometimes fractures there because then now you have multiple teams owning the personalization journey. And so this goes a little bit deeper into kind of org structure, but if you can give one cross-functional kind of lead or team the authority to kind of own the full personalization journey, that will help a lot in pinpointing where and how to scale your personalization effectively. Right. All right, so we are going to dive into personalization maturity now. I'm going to hand it over to Martin here in a minute, and we have another poll up.
All right, so while you are answering this poll as well, we are going to dive into one of the topics and areas that is, of course, a key pillar for personalization. And you also answered that in the previous poll, as of course, it's about data. So a lot of the personalization means that also, like, what is the information that we actually can use to deliver a better experience, also based on the goals that you have. But also, let's not forget about the visitors and your customers. What is it that they actually are trying to achieve? We tend to see this as a maturity model in terms of where you are climbing up. But before we start to run through this as well, I think it's important to also note that just because you are in the bottom does not mean that the things that you can do down there is less effective than what you're doing in the top. This maturity model is more around what type of data is usually accessible and easily accessible for you. So we're also going to explain a little bit later that there's a lot of things that you can do also in the bottom of this pyramid at all. But talking about personalization and especially when you do once and per all, is like when we usually talk about A/B testing and experimentation, that's in the bottom. And most experiments today is actually done by all of your traffic, which is of course also great. If you do hit something that is targeting everyone of your visitors and you can deliver a better experience, of course, like that becomes a great leverage. But we tend to also understand and learn that far from all of our visitors are the same. So while we climb up these to the many, is also like things that you can use as location device to offer, like a slightly different types of experience for people that are looking at a small screen versus, for example, a big screen. But you can also, of course, start to listen into what are the intent of your visitors, what pages are they actually starting to look at, grouping that into more or less when you start to look at psychographical data in terms of can we group these into segments of our customers. So looking at lookalike profiles. And when you're combining a lot of these different types of sources, is usually when you get to the one-to-one personalization, when you have a lot of these different areas. And with that said, I think it's also time for us to look at a next poll to also say, see like, how would you actually describe your organization's data, audience, and segmentation capabilities? Super. So while we do that, let's also then just go through like, so what does this actually mean? We usually talk about a short-term memory and a long-term memory. And what reasons do we have with this as well? Well, there's still a lot of things that you can do in terms of looking at the bottom of the pyramid as well. And we talked about the stuff that you can collect. And the biggest difference in this as well is that a lot of this actual information that you get is based in the base of the profile. So in the browser profile of your visitors. But in the first tier that you actually already can do is like start looking at your customers. What are they browsing? What are they viewing? You can even start to look at, what were they browsing in the past when they were visiting your site before. So in most CMS systems, but also in personalization, like out of the box, there's a lot of information you can collect and use at the start of your personalization program. Anything from where they are, your location, from the device, the time of day, what they've been browsing, also kind of previous experience. But if you also would like to take this relationship a little bit further, you also want to be able to understand and maybe from a more of a long-term example. And let's see here a little bit as well to see like which best describes your experimentation program. And we talked about like if it's a little bit ad hoc, if it's established, or if it's more mature. A lot of these things as well is when you're looking at the long-term versus the short-term memory. There's a lot of things that you can do while creating a better experience based on the stuff that you actually need to do in the session. But to truly understand customers, you also want to collect the data you have from the different channels, which means that you want to be able to use maybe information about what they clicked in the email on your website, but also what you actually know from them, from your CRM system, from the ordering data as well. And for that, you actually need to attach something else like a customer data platform as well. So those are the two things in which you kind of have the short-term memory in which you can use to target your visitors. But if you also want to mature that into personas sessions and the longer terms, you probably need to connect that as well to one repository so that you get this single customer view of your customers as well. So how could we actually start using this as well? Well, there's, of course, a lot of different things that you can do, but one of the things that most people already do today is the one-to-many, is where we're actually adapting our experience towards the mobile behavior. But when we're talking about personalization, it's not just about adapting it. We have a customer as an example that referenced that could see that the behavior of their mobile visitors was a little bit different depending on if they were a direct traffic hit, if they were coming from our organic search, or if they're actually coming from paid channels. So they could see that people coming in from paid channels on a mobile device had less scroll time. They wanted to find things way faster, which means that you have to personalize based on getting the right information as high up as possible before people actually bounce from it as well. So even using mobile device is something. But when you're maturing as well, you can also start looking at like what type of differences is it between, for example, people that would be sitting in Sweden versus people that would have been sitting in the US. But even things as like, what are you browsing during the evening time versus maybe when you're, sitting by a desktop device during middle of the day. Further up, talking about the usage of these data points as well is when we start to look at more or less the individual based behavior, maybe where people start to say that it's becoming a little bit more creepy is where you start to actually listen to the intent and start to listen into what is it that you're actually clicking on, what is it that you're actually browsing, what is it that you might be browsing, a couple of days before, to see like how could we connect this information to be able to serve this. So for an example, maybe when they're returning, making sure that you're adapting the website based on things that they showed interest in just a couple of days ago as well. So in contextual way. But further up in the hyper-targeted user personalization is where we're connecting all of this information that you can get from all of these channels based on also maybe the predicted behavior that you've been seeing as at the same as lookalike audiences. And in terms of that, also recommending things that you believe would be the next best action for their audience.
And I think,
yeah.
Sorry, Martin. Just one other thing, because I'm kind of looking at this poll data, almost 50% of everybody here is talking about having some sort of established experimentation program or feeling like theirs is a mature program. And I think one really great thing to call out here is that, you have the data, you're already doing one-to-many, one-to-some in some form or fashion with this experimentation program. And so taking those steps, kind of moving up the pyramid, is really just about exactly what Martin was talking about, like understanding where that data is kind of coming in from, how you're using it to move up that pyramid. And I believe most of that is all available within an Optimizely platform or your testing platform as well. So you don't generally have to add a bunch to your data stack to be able to do and move up that pyramid.
Correct.
Awesome. I'm going to jump over. Okay, there we go.
So personalization is really a team sport. So this is also why we can see that it's quite hard for some organizations to manage. We usually see that you need to be able to do different kind of things. And this is something that spreads across the organization as well. First of all, you need to be able to plan and prioritize, be able to understand where is actually personalization delivering value and what value does it actually deliver for us? What is it that we actually would like for the customer set to take that as next steps action? Or what is it actually that we can see that we can make a big difference in the user experience? Once we know that, we need to, of course, understand who are we targeting. So what type of segments of the users that we want to do. And when we're talking about segments, we also mentioned this as well. A segment can be as easy as people on a mobile device that are coming from paid traffic channels, but it can also be a cluster of different types of audiences that we know that people that previously bought and purchased coming from a specific geolocation that has been visiting the sites X amount of hours before this as well. And once we do that as well, we need to, of course, be able to also, create the experience as well. So it's around what content do we want them to show? So what difference in the user experience do you want to deliver? There's also different types of ways of delivering this as well. And two of the most common ways is, of course, the rules-based. If a person has been doing X, show them Y. But we also have a lot of content or products on our websites and our e-commerce sites as well. So part of that is, of course, the recommendations engines, where we want to make sure that all of the content that we have on our site or all of the products, let's make sure to more or less surface the most relevant ones. And to be able to understand, the value from this in the end as well is, of course, for us to be able to analyze. How can we make sure that the experiences that we are trying to deliver or that we're delivering is actually delivering the value that we want to? And we can't do this, of course, without talking about modern technology as well. And we see a lot of the AI advantages in this. So we're going to give you a couple of examples of how can actually AI deliver these, value for the customers as well, and as well as from you. One of the things that we're seeing is like we do a lot of heuristic analysis for our customers, which means that we're gathering a lot of data from what customers have been doing. And we're offering, of course, this also in a way of being able to analyze websites, and it kind of spits out recommendations of ideas of what you can actually test. But it also happens sometimes you get a lot of ideas. And I know, Samantha, you guys also have a way of like, how do you prioritize among what of these ideas is that you actually should be able to do?
Yeah, so our clients, we have a platform internally that is used for our clients. It's called Iris, and we just launched Impact Lens. And what Impact Lens does is it uses predictive analytics with historical test data to assign each experiment, each personalization initiative that you're going to test a probability to win score and an estimated revenue impact. And the goal with this type of predictive impact scoring is to really help teams prioritize. Okay, I have this whole list of things we want to do, we want to optimize, or we want to test. Which ones are most likely to have the highest impact, especially kind of going back to these barriers and bandwidth being also a major one for most people. If you're able to then prioritize like, hey, these 6 out of 20 things are going to be the most impactful, then we're going to go ahead and prioritize those in your planning framework. So that's how we're utilizing Impact Lens. It's still in beta, but if that is interesting to you, we'll send you some more information after the webinar, and happy to kind of chat a little bit deeper about that.
That's fantastic. So like we said is in the beginning as well, like, I mean, with Optimizely, you could get all of these ideas of what you should probably do. And with the Iris, you can also, of course, prioritize these. But then it comes to actually looking at what advantages do we have in the creation piece. Well, of course, AI is better than most humans in spotting areas in which where you could focus. That means about understanding what type of segments. It can find smaller segments around customers that you probably didn't know. So people living in, North Carolina that are females, browsing in on their mobile device in the evening as well. So like figuring out these, segments. And we have this as well with something that called AI suggested segments. It's kind of like figures out those segments that you could target. But maybe even bigger is, of course, the content creation piece of this as well. So with personalization, you always need to create more and more content. And of course, generative AI delivers an easier way to multiply this. We also have an advantage when it comes to delivering this. We talked about rules-based personalizations, but even recommendations have some sort of like at least machine learning in this as well. But what if you have a certain amount of content, a certain amount of people, and you don't actually know how to match this as well, and you don't have the historical data? So what contextual bandits is doing, it kind of streamlines traffic and delivers it to, maybe you have 3 different sets of products that you want to deliver, and it starts to understand the attributes of the visitors that is engaging with this. So it learns during the time and in real time starts to personalize based on this as well. So this is also how AI is helping us. And the last part, of course, is how do you better understand and analyze the value of this as well? And I know that, Samantha, you have a lot of input in this area as well.
Yeah, so going back to kind of our Iris platform, it really centralizes all of the testing data. So takes the Optimizely or the test data that you're getting, your GA4 or wherever your source of truth is, and we custom create an ROI model for you. So then it calculates your annualized business impact and really flags any of these strategic opportunity areas that then can be fed right back into Impact Lens to determine if those opportunity areas are going to have the most impact. And so if you can really find ways to kind of streamline the plan, create, deliver, and analyze piece, that's when you get that kind of like flywheel of momentum going. And I think a lot of the times we want AI to like be that kind of unlock, but I think Martin and I find that, going back to those basics, making sure you have everything and then adding in these AI pieces to really kind of supercharge it versus relying on AI to do it initially will get kind of the process going. quickly. And I noticed we have a couple of Q&A or questions kind of coming in. I just wanted to note that we're going to dive into the customer case study and then open it up for Q&A at the end. So please keep putting your questions in and we'll knock those out at the end. All right, so we're gonna kind of put that plan, create, deliver, optimize framework to the test here with Calendly. They had a ton of big goals, but one of them was to move these users that they had who signed up for their trial into these vocal advocates and kind of loyalty customers. And so you'll kind of see here throughout this case study how the behavior kind of led tweaks compounded into this really great lift. So first, I think going back, we talk about, I saw a question in the chat of how to understand your e-commerce store and everything like that. And I think the biggest piece that we really need to unlock is the customer journey. Where is that untapped potential? And so for Calendly, we did a user journey and identified these 4 friction buckets. First was some navigation hurdles. People couldn't grab their calendar links really quickly, create events fast, or the My account sometimes even got kind of hidden. And the second was the people who signed up for that trial to paid conversions were stalling. So those trials users either weren't seeing enough of that immediate value to swipe and keep, putting their money down for a paid conversion. Third, the key features that Calendly has were kind of hidden in plain sight. So adoption was lagging and the product full power wasn't getting noticed. And then last, the overall engagement wasn't where they wanted it. So started kind of moving into this plan, create, deliver, analyze, and validate. With the Calendly's product team, we essentially ran that playbook that we talked about earlier. So plan and prioritize, we mapped those critical actions that predicted that long-term retention, started to create and deliver those. And we did those in a couple different ways, but mostly through experimentation and iterating into personalization, which you'll see here in a moment. Built those hypotheses around those specific moments, launched experiments, and then captured that behavior and that user activity data along the way to continue to inform the plan. And then obviously we analyzed and iterated on each test, each sprint, really keeping that flywheel going and tightening it as we're going along. So the first iteration of create and deliver, you'll see kind of this pivot point take shape. It wasn't hyper personalized to start, but the first wave of tests, we personalized headers for returning users. So kind of going back to that pyramid where we're at in the data, we're doing returning versus net new users. A one-click path to my account right in that front homepage. And then that secondary CTA, really nudging that adoption to download it to Chrome, making sure that they're getting the most out of that product. And just this result netted out to 3.5 more KPI events created and more key product areas driven. And these, again, then we went into that analyze phase, analyzed what this looked like and iterated upon that, which led us here. So adding kind of that name-based greeting to build that trust. And I think this is really unique in the sense that Home Chef, adding that name didn't work, but adding it here did work. So again, kind of testing into that personalization. The quick start cards on this right-hand side here to increase product adoption and that perception, and then the progress bar making people feel like they were getting momentum through that trial and through that user. And this personalization drove an additional 5% bump in those key actions. And so I think what's really interesting here is that a lot of these on the left-hand side are just content tweaks and understanding what the user wanted you to be talking to them about and then giving that to them there. And I think this is my favorite outcome of something like personalization. Users were bragging about this for Calendly. So that's like, free PR there, but the product-led growth was really working. They had tweets, they had LinkedIn posts calling out how great this experience was. And just really showcasing, I think, that when you kind of hit that sweet spot between relevancy, respecting what they are looking for, and giving them what they need, you really kind of just hit it out of the park. So I think that's a really great showcase to show how that plan, create, iterate, framework really works. And if you can kind of break down those barriers, understand where you're getting stuck, you're going to be able to really move through and see something really cool. All right, so I am going to stop sharing and pop over into the Q&A. All right, so Joe asked, are there schema standards that would make it easier for AI, for example, ChatGPT, to understand our e-commerce store? Martin, do you want to take any of that technical stuff, or I can take a stab at it as well?
Feel free to take a stab at it.
All right, putting us on the spot. So yeah, I think there are a lot of standards that would make it easier, but because it's so specific to what your site's built on, how your back end looks, and everything like that, we would be happy to run that by our engineers to give you some recommendations. So send me an email afterwards, and I can get you connected in there to get that for your specific e-commerce store.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions, things that we can help you address? We're going to go ahead and send out the recording after this, as well as the opportunity if you want to jump on a specific consult with Martin or myself to walk through your specific site. I think because personalization, as we kind of talked about, is so personal and your stores are set up really uniquely, it's good to get that initial perspective. We have a question: how can I balance data privacy with demand for personalized experiences, especially in industries with tighter laws and regulations like healthcare? Martin, go ahead with the HIPAA, and then I can jump in with how we kind of do that at Cro Metrics.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, this is, of course, I mean, like there's laws and regulations, and they are different everywhere as well. Like I'm coming from the Nordics, and we have our things, and we have HIPAA and other regulations also in the US. But based on that, it's kind of the same as well. There are, of course, a lot of things and a lot of data points that does not necessarily mean that you're like using privacy or PII sensitive information. And I think it's just important to also a little bit understand what those kind of data points are as well, and where you're feeling as well that you are like breaching that, and depending on in what channels as well. So there's still a lot of these things that you can use even legally. But we might be also coming in a little bit about like what you can use and what you would like to use depending on it. But feel free to jump in here as well, Samantha, in terms of how you're handling this.
Yeah, I think if you look at some of our clients like Talkspace, you'll see some tests that were run on their homepage where the person who was coming to the site was actually able to kind of self-identify. So you're not using any of that PII or that super personal information that's behind HIPAA regulations or anything like that. And you're allowing them to kind of tailor that experience. So they're coming to the site and they're saying, you know, are you an adult looking for therapy? Are you looking for medication? Are you a teen? Are you a teen parent? By giving sometimes the user themselves that ability to choose their own path, that allows them to kind of create that personalized experience without having to go past that bridge of having too much information or not being able to use some of the information that you have behind that HIPAA paywall. And I think the same, there's a lot of things for banking as well. We've seen a lot with things like cards and loans and things like that. You really just want to make sure that the consumer understands where they're going. And a lot of the times, I think desktop mobile navigation, a lot of those things, where are your acquisition channels coming into the site? Those are things that don't require a lot of sensitive information, but can really help personalize the customer journey from the jump to be able to give them that really tailored experience until they log in. And then behind there's, you know, different regulations on what you can and cannot personalize.
Yes, of course. I mean, like one of the things that we tend to oversee, which is just symmetric messaging, making sure that people coming in from a specific channel, having a specific interest without having to understand exactly who they are, that they get, you know, the experience, or like that you were removing the friction that you will, you know, need for them as well. So there's tons of things that you can do as well. Like you can do, you know, things for when they're logged in. as well. Even though I do know that, especially in banking, there's a lot of people that tend to not want to do that, depending on what they're logged in as well, because people are there, of course, to run their errands and banking and things like that.
Great. We've seen a lot of success with symmetric messaging. I think we have a case study on our site with Curology, and it was simply making sure that people who were coming into their website through acquisition channels were getting to the right places, and it really helped conversion to just do that type of segmentation.
So to the question also, like coming back to ChatGPT, and I think we get a lot of these questions around generative AI and how can it learn more around it. I think what we're starting to see now, and there's a lot of talk about agents now as well, in terms of like, where does it deliver value? And one thing that we started to see in last year, but we're also definitely seeing right now, this is like the best use cases of AI is not when it's a standalone feature, but it's actually embedded in your technology. So like one thing that we will see way more is like when AI and generative AI can understand and learn from the data that you actually have, which means that it sits within the systems, it delivers way more value. So those are kind of the use cases as well, that we're going to see more and more of these agents that are in the application. Because that's where they get to on one hand, they can access the data. On the other hand, they can access the content, and the experience more or less sits in between them.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I have a friend who works at Nike, and they were doing user testing within their design. And most of their 40 and under were leaving the Nike site and going to some sort of AI because they did not have the AI on the site to be able to help them navigate to what they were looking for and those recommendations. So I think you're spot on. If you're getting people to the site, do you have AI, the ability for them to help move them through that personalized customer journey, or is it creating friction points? So I think it's really interesting. It will be continually more interesting as these AI agents kind of get deployed, and how we're able to utilize them to help people find exactly what they're looking for, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Awesome. We have a couple more minutes if anybody has any one-off questions. All right. Well, like I said, we're going to send out this deck. We're going to send out a couple of resources for you, as well as Martin and I's information. So feel free to set up a call with us. We'd love to just chat through with you what you're facing internally, and see if we can help you kind of unblock anything. So thanks so much for joining today, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.